Yeah, look, we're just a little family business just south of Bairnsdale. So great to see Nagel on because yeah, I think a lot of you would know where we farm. So we're just pretty much in right beside the Bairnsdale Airport. So we have a block of land in there. Our business is a family business, but in saying that, I'm the first generation of farmers here in East Gippsland. So we originally come from South Gippsland, down near Leongatha, and my wife and our 3 children shifted up to East Gippsland to Bairnsdale in 2003. And we started with about 1,000-acre farm, and then over the last 15 years, we've grown that, and now it sort of looks like about 3,500 acres. The first slide, if we can pop that one back up again, that's just looking right from the front of our place, just with an aerial shot, and that for the Nagel students and such. Right at the front of it, the road you can see is Humphreys Road. So, and we're looking to the south, and you can actually see the ocean all the way out to the south. So, I love that shot. It's a lovely shot of the countryside. Just the next slide, Amy. So, as I said, our business started in 2003, and at that stage, it was just a fairly small, humble little business where we ran about 150 breeding cows and started growing a little bit of cereal crops, some wheat and barley and crops like that. And we were really growing the cereal crops just to try and develop the farm, because some of the farms that we'd bought at that stage were very infertile and weren't really even good enough for running cattle on. They were more likely actually sheep farms, so places that merino sheep had been running on. But over a period of time, with putting some good soil amendments on the country, and we're great believers in using lots of lime. So we've probably put about 6,000 tonne of lime on in the last 15 years, and a lot of chook manure. So we cart chook manure from some of the poultry sheds down towards Melbourne, and we use that as a great way of increasing the soil fertility. And we believe a lot of this work that we need to do to deal with variable climates is actually getting the soil in better shape so that the soil actually is more resilient to when we actually have periods of time where we don't get enough rain, or sometimes when we actually get an east coast low and we actually do get too much rain. So that can be quite destructive to our country as well. We run about 500 to 600 breeding cows, and all of the calves from them are grown to about 15 to 18 months of age, and they are supplied straight into what we call the grass-fed meat market. So if anyone was to walk into Coles supermarket, they would actually see a brand label in there called Graze, and that's one of the markets we supply. So guaranteed grass-fed beef, and that's been I think that's a great market for farmers, and I think it's a great thing for the environment as well, where we're actually consuming naturally produced meat. Perhaps the next slide, Amy. So I guess how the changing climate is affecting us. As I've said, we have grown a lot of cereal crops, which are wheat and barley crops and canola crops. But over the last 4 years especially, we have really struggled with very dry winters, and at times actually not being able to get those crops well established through the winter months. I think the other thing that I'm observing is we seem to be getting a lot more windy days. So take a bit of notice, students. If they forecast a 20-kilometre wind for tomorrow, just see whether it exceeds that 20 kilometres. Is what I'm observing is it nearly always exceeds what they're forecasting. So I think that's having a huge effect on the amount of evaporation we're having. Not only water out of dams, but moisture from our soils, and hence drying our profile out to make it harder to grow some crops. So I think the wind is another really big issue that we're all dealing with. Pop on to the next one, Amy. Some of the things that we've been trialling within our own business, because we know that we have to adapt to this changing climate, because if we can't adapt to it, I don't think we'll be in business in another 10 or 15 years' time. And so we are trying to grow crops that are what I would call shorter season growing crops. So rather than something that might need to be planted in March and won't get planted and harvested until January, that's a long time for the season to be kind to you. So we're more likely now to grow, say, a barley crop, which we could possibly plant in June and be harvesting it by November, so that we've actually got a little bit more chance of reading what the season is going to do. Certainly trying to do a lot less cultivation than we ever used to. So we don't want to open the soil up and let it dry out. We want to be direct drilling. I heard Graham talk a minute ago a little bit about drills with press wheels and things like that. We've got quite a bit of that sort of machinery. So as the seed gets planted in the ground, no soil is really disturbed, and the press wheel closes it all up again and keeps it a really nice environment. And keeping ground cover over the farm 12 months of the year, whether that's something growing or something that's a dead plant, but it actually shades the soil, so that keeps the soil a lot cooler, and that's a really important thing to do, I believe, as well. And then we've been playing with this concept of what we call relay cropping. And relay cropping is a way that we're trying to get another crop, a new crop established, whilst we still have the old crop growing. And the advantage with that is that normally you would wait for the finish of harvest of a particular crop to start planting the next crop. But we got this idea that perhaps if we could actually get a crop to grow underneath an existing crop, you would actually have a chance to utilize a little bit more of the moisture that's there. So you can just see that aeroplane flying over that crop. And if Amy flicks onto the next slide, we come up with the idea that if we were to get an aeroplane that would normally be used to spread fertilizer or something like that in, and we got him in about 6 weeks before our wheat crops and our barley crops were due to be harvested, what would happen if we actually flew like millet and rapeseed, both very small seeds, over the top of these wheat and barley crops, which are still yet to be harvested. So they're probably still 6 weeks from being harvested. Some would say, well, why do you want to do that? The reason we need to do that, we believe, is that if we were to get rain in that last 6 weeks of that wheat crop's life, that wheat crop actually hasn't got any ability to utilize that rain, because that wheat crop is actually drying down, it's dying, it's actually getting to the stage it's ready to harvest. So if we've got seed that's been flown over it, and it was lucky enough that that seed could actually strike on the ground and grow, you just might find that you actually have the next crop growing at the same time as you're harvesting the last crop. So we tried this 3 years ago. 3 years ago was the first time. And if you flick onto the next slide, Amy, we'll show you what happened. So here we are, about 6 weeks after the aeroplane has flown over the paddocks. And this is a wheat crop that the header has just done a run straight along and to harvest the grain, harvest some of the grain. And when you look down into the stubble, you've actually got all of this green material starting to grow in the bottom of the wheat crop. And that's all of the wheat, the millet seed and the rape seed that we'd actually flown over with the aeroplane. Now, because it's not a precise way of planting something, we may have only got like a 50% germination of the seed that we flew over those crops. But it was still enough to actually get quite a strike of green material. And the interesting thing was that when the wheat crop was standing there, that green material stayed fairly small and not particularly actively growing. But as soon as the wheat crop was harvested and the daylight come in onto those little seedlings underneath, there was just a huge amount of growth because the sunlight got to it and it got to photosynthesize, and off it went. So just go across to the next slide, Amy, please. And then some of the paddocks we actually grazed when they were fairly young, and others we actually locked them up and used it as what we call a standing haystack of feed to feed cattle all the way through February and March. And pretty much those cows standing in there is what some of these paddocks looked like that had been aerial planted with millet and rape. And it's something that as farmers, we believe that we need to do a lot more research work on. And very fortunately, the Gippsland Agricultural Group with the research farm at Bairnsdale is actually got an application at the moment for a project to do some research work on the subject as well. It just could be a great way of actually farmers being able to really utilise the moisture they get through the summer a lot more effectively. So that's a little bit of our story of how we're trying to adapt to a changing climate.
Trevor, we've got a great question here from Mafra. They said that they believe that there might be a lot of ungerminated millet and rapeseed. Is that something that you'd say is a significant cost to you? Is putting those seeds out if they don't germinate?
No, not particularly, because the cost of the seed was about $20 per hectare, and the cost of the aeroplane was about $15 per hectare. And that little bit of seed that hasn't germinated it's a cost, but the way we looked at all of that was it's cost us say $35 per hectare for the aeroplane and the seed. And even if we only grew 1 tonne of dry matter per hectare from this activity, that meant that feed has only cost us $35 per tonne of dry matter. And you start buying a tonne of hay and you're paying $200 a tonne for the tonne of hay, it makes the millet and the rape that's growing in the paddock look very, very cheap.
Another question from Mafra too, is there a reason why you chose millet and rape?
Yes. Gee, Mafra's got the good questions, haven't they?
They do. Good work, Mafra.
Yes. So the reason we chose millet and rape is they're both very small seeds which don't actually need to be buried under the tilth of the soil to grow sometimes. So if we were to throw out, say, a corn seed, I don't think any of it would grow because it's a large seed and it really needs to be buried under a little bit of soil. But being millet and rape, they will nearly grow laying on the surface. So that was the thought behind the millet and the rape, yes.
It seemed like it worked, so it was a good decision.
It did work. We did get lucky.
Yeah. Now, thank you so much for that, Trevor. That was really great and very interesting, and your cows look very happy. So
they were.